I've heard men talk about how their lives went from perfect to shattered overnight. Honestly, I used to think they were exaggerating until it happened to me. At 33 years old, I thought I had it all figured out. I had a job people only dream of, working for an aerospace company and designing evacuation systems for NASA's manned spacecraft. It wasn't just a career, it was my purpose, my calling. And then there was Sabrina, my wife of 7 years. I loved her deeply, or at least the woman I thought she was. We built a life together that I was proud of. 3 incredible kids. Liam, our spirited 7-year-old, and the twins, Chloe and Grace, who lit up every room they walked into. My family was my anchor. I'd sacrifice anything for them. I thought Sabrina felt the same way. We had a good life. A beautiful 4-bedroom home in a safe, welcoming neighborhood. My parents lived close by, always eager to spoil their grandkids, and Sabrina's sister Hannah was practically part of the household. There was love. There was laughter. There was peace. Or at least that's what I told myself. Looking back, I can't pinpoint exactly when it started to fall apart. Maybe it was when Chloe and Grace started school. Sabrina began acting different. She became distant, cold even. I try to chalk it up to stress, or the natural growing pains that come with raising 3 young kids. She dropped hints, little comments here and there, about how things weren't quite right between us. But I didn't know how to respond. I was too focused on holding everything together to notice the cracks forming beneath my feet. And then there was Victor Grant, her boss. I never liked the guy. From the moment I met him at her company's Christmas party, I knew there was something off about him. He was smug, entitled, and had this sleazy charm that made my stomach churn. Whenever I visited Sabrina at work, he acted like he owned her. The way he looked at me, like I was an inconvenience, made my blood boil. But I ignored my instincts. I told myself I was just being paranoid. I trusted Sabrina, or at least I wanted to. It all came crashing down on that Friday. The twins had just finished kindergarten, and I'd taken them to my parents for the weekend. I thought the time away from the kids would give Sabrina and me a chance to reconnect, to salvage whatever was slipping away between us. I was wrong. When I walked through the door, I froze. Sabrina was standing in the living room, dressed like I hadn't seen her in years. A tight black dress, heels that seemed too high to walk in, and makeup so perfect it could have been airbrushed. She looked breathtaking, and yet I felt nothing but dread. "Wow, Sabrina, you look amazing," I said, forcing a smile. If I'd known we were going out, I would have rushed back sooner. "Just let me change real quick." That's when she dropped the bomb. "We're not going anywhere, Ethan. I'm leaving, but not with you." I stared at her, the words not making sense in my head. "What do you mean by that?" She looked me in the eye, completely calm, and said, "I have a date. With Victor Grant." My heart stopped. For a moment, I thought I hadn't heard her right. "What kind of sick joke is this?" "It's not a joke," she said, her tone colder than I'd ever heard. "Victor is picking me up in 30 minutes. We'll be staying at a hotel downtown. I won't be back until Sunday." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. "If you walk out that door, Sabrina, don't bother coming back." She didn't even flinch. She just smiled, no smirked. "You're not in a position to give ultimatums, Ethan. Listen carefully, because this is how things are going to work from now on. We're still married, but I need more. If you make a scene, you'll only make things worse for yourself. Think about the kids. Do you really want them to see their father lose everything?" Her words hit me like a slap across the face. This wasn't the woman I married. This wasn't the mother of my children. Who was she? My hands shook with anger, but I couldn't let myself lose control. "Not yet. I can't believe this," I muttered. "You can't just waltz in here and tell me." "I'm not done," she interrupted, her voice sharp. "Victor will explain the rest to you if you don't want to listen to me. But trust me, you won't like it if it comes from him." I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow. "If that jerk steps 1 foot into my house, he won't leave in one piece." She rolled her eyes, like I was being childish. "Don't be stupid, Ethan. Victor has a bodyguard, Max. If you try anything, you'll end up in the hospital. Or worse." I felt sick. My head was spinning, my stomach churning. I'd felt this way before, years ago, during my time in the Middle East. The same sinking realization that you've walked straight into an ambush. But this wasn't an enemy in some distant war zone. This was my wife. The woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. I couldn't take it. I couldn't listen to another word. Without saying anything, I turned and headed for the stairs. "Where are you going?" she demanded, her voice sharp and commanding. "We're not done talking." I didn't answer. My world was collapsing around me, and I needed to get away from her before I said, or did, something I'd regret. Upstairs, I sat on the edge of the bed we used to share and buried my face in my hands. For the first time in years, I felt like I had no idea who I was anymore. "I'll freshen up and be down in 5 minutes." I told her calmly, though inside, I was anything but calm. I needed a moment to think, to process what was happening. There are a few rules I've always lived by when it comes to ambushes. First, see it coming before it hits you. With Sabrina and Victor, I failed miserably. I didn't see this coming at all. Second, find shelter quickly. That's why I was heading straight to my bedroom now. And the third rule? Develop an escape plan for yourself and your team. I had no team anymore, but I damn sure needed a plan. Once in the bedroom, I shut the door and leaned against it, breathing heavily. I changed out of my work clothes and into something more comfortable, more mobile just in case. Then I grabbed my phone, switched on the voice recorder, and slid it into my pocket, the camera peeking out just enough to capture everything. If Sabrina and Victor thought they could blindside me, I wasn't going to make it easy for them. My gaze landed on the old chest at the foot of our bed. Inside, under my service uniforms and medals, was Betsy, my 9mm Marine Corps pistol. Technically, I wasn't supposed to have it anymore, but a mix-up during my discharge let me keep her. Betsy had saved my life more times than I could count in combat, and tonight, just having her close felt like armor. I loaded the magazine with practiced ease and tucked the gun into my waistband, covering it with my shirt. It was a semi-automatic double-action pistol, so all I needed to do was pull the trigger. If someone wasn't specifically looking for it, they'd never know I was armed. From downstairs, Sabrina's voice cut through my thoughts like a knife. "Oscar, come down. You'll regret it if you don't." "Just a moment," I shouted back. "Bring me a beer while you're at it." The delay gave me enough time to steady myself. I wasn't sure how this confrontation would go, but I wasn't walking in unprepared. Before leaving the bedroom, I double-checked the recorder on my phone. If Sabrina and Victor were planning something, I needed evidence, proof of how deep this betrayal ran. When I walked into the living room, Sabrina was already seated at the table with a glass of wine in her hand. A cold smile played on her lips as she slid a beer across the table toward me. "Finally," she said, her tone stern. "We need to settle a few things before Victor arrives." I took a seat and opened a beer, not saying a word. If there was one thing I'd learned in the Marines, it was to stay calm during an interrogation. Let them talk first, reveal their hand. Sabrina took a sip of wine and folded her arms. "I can see you've got something on your mind, Oscar," she began. "Why don't you tell me how you feel about this new situation?" I took a slow drink from my beer, letting the silence hang between us. "First of all," I finally said, "remember that I love you. We have a family. I want to grow old with you, Sabrina. I don't want to hurt you. But this hurts me more than you can imagine." She rolled her eyes, clearly irritated. "No, did. Just Sabrina and Oscar," I cut in sharply. The ban on any terms of endearment visibly annoyed her, but I didn't care. "Fine," she said, her voice colder now. "Things have changed, and you're going to have to accept that. You need to know that Victor and I have grown very close. After he made me his personal assistant, our relationship became intimate. We've been having an affair for 7 months." Her words hit me like a sledgehammer. I clenched my fists under the table, trying to keep my composure as she continued. She described how it started. Innocent flirting, coffee breaks, then late nights in his office. She didn't hold back, recounting their first intimate encounter on his office couch, her voice laced with a twisted kind of pride. "He's charming, attractive, fit, hard to resist," she said with a smirk. "He's a skilled lover, Oscar. I enjoyed it so much, I didn't want it to end." I felt the beer bottle tremble in my hand. "And at no point did you think about how this might affect me? Your husband?" My voice cracked, betraying the pain I was trying so hard to suppress. "No," she said bluntly. "I didn't, but that doesn't mean I don't love you. You're the man I want to spend my life with." I almost laughed at the absurdity of her words. "Love me?" I said bitterly. You've spent the last 7 months stabbing me in the back, and you call that love? She ignored my question. This isn't about choosing between you and Victor. I've already made my decision. We're staying married, Oscar. I'm not leaving you, and you're not leaving me. But you need to accept that Victor and I will be spending more time together. I stared at her in disbelief as she laid out her new rules. She explained that she'd be staying with Victor overnight a couple of times a week, traveling with him for business, and even taking trips to Europe and the Caribbean. He pays me well, she said, as if that justified everything. This will be good for us. Think about the benefits. Imagine vacations, college funds for the kids, finally renovating that lake house we've always dreamed about. I felt a cold, bitter laugh escape my lips. You really think I'd want to touch a dime of Victor's money? You think I'd sell my dignity for your affair? Her smile faltered, and anger flashed in her eyes. I'm not just a mistress, Oscar, she snapped. I'm an important part of the company. You're delusional. I cut in, my voice quiet but firm. You want me to stand by while you parade around with your boss like it's normal? You want me to accept this as our life? I took another sip of beer, more to keep my hands from trembling than anything else. Her words, her tone, the casual way she described their affair, it was all too much. My world wasn't just falling apart. It was being burned to the ground, and she was holding the match. But I wasn't done yet. If she thought I'd roll over and accept this, she didn't know me at all. Sabrina leaned back in her chair, swirling the wine in her glass with a casual arrogance that made my blood boil. You don't understand, Ethan, she said with a smirk. I'm not just some random assistant. Victor relies on me for everything at the firm. Managing his schedule, handling his biggest clients, it's all part of the deal. And yes, the closeness between us is part of the package. He's a powerful, influential man, and I'm flattered that he wants me as his mistress. You should be too. Her words hit me like a sledgehammer. I stared at her, barely able to believe what I was hearing. Flattered, I finally managed to say, my voice cracking with anger. You think I should feel flattered that you're humiliating me, dragging me and our kids into this nightmare? Sabrina took another sip of wine, utterly unbothered. Ethan, let's be honest. This affair probably won't last forever. I'd say it'll last 2, maybe 3 years at most. After that, everything will go back to normal. I'll be your faithful wife again, and we'll enjoy the next 50 years together as a family. I couldn't believe her audacity. And in the meantime, I'm supposed to just sit back and accept this? Watch you destroy everything we've built. There's more, she continued, as if I hadn't spoken. Victor wants to be friends with you. He thinks we can share me. He's even okay with you still being intimate with me, as long as you play by his rules. He knows I love you and still want to be close to you. He wants to be a part of our family, Ethan. Maybe even like an uncle to the kids. At that moment, I felt like my entire world was collapsing. The life I'd built, the family I'd cherished, the values I held sacred, it was all crumbling before my eyes. My stomach twisted with anger and disgust. I clenched my fists under the table, trying to stay calm, though every fiber of my being wanted to lash out. That scumbag will never see my children, I said, my voice low and seething. He won't come near them, and he won't meddle in my family. Do you hear me? He has no business here. Sabrina shrugged, like my anger was nothing more than an inconvenience. Victor is married, you know. His wife comes from a wealthy family, but unfortunately, she can't have children. Their marriage is more of a business arrangement. Maybe he should consider adoption, I said coldly, and stay the hell away from other people's families. Sabrina sighed, as if I was the unreasonable one. He wants his own biological children, Ethan. A son to carry on his name and legacy, and maybe a daughter too. Why doesn't this charming jerk hire a surrogate? I snapped. He can have as many kids as he wants without destroying someone else's life. He's worried he won't be a good father, Sabrina said softly, lowering her eyes. He wants a child to grow up in a loving family. That's when the truth hit me like a freight train. I stood up, nearly knocking over the chair. Oh, I see it now, I said bitterly. He wants you to have his child, doesn't he? And I'm supposed to raise it for him. Is that his master plan? It would be our child, Sabrina said, her voice steady. You'd love the baby, just like you love me. The child would have a double surname. Victor would cover all the expenses, everything from diapers to college tuition. Are you already pregnant? I demanded, my voice trembling with rage. No, she said quickly. But Victor wants me to stop taking the pill in a few months. I told him I'd only agree if you're on board with this. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head in disbelief. As if this could get any worse, I muttered. Stop saying that, she snapped, slamming her wine glass down on the table. I know you're upset, Ethan, but maybe, just maybe, you'll change your mind later. Her words felt like knives twisting in my gut. Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. Sabrina jumped up, smoothing her dress as she hurried to answer it. My hands clenched in a fist as I heard Victor's voice greet her warmly. When they walked into the room, Victor's arm was wrapped possessively around her waist. He kissed her on the cheek, completely ignoring me. My jaw tightened as I watched the smug grin on his face. How did he react? Victor asked her, glancing at me like I wasn't even there. Not very well, Sabrina said with a sigh. You might have to explain the consequences of disobedience. Victor turned to me, standing tall in his perfectly tailored black suit. He was an imposing man, over 6 feet tall, with long gray hair slicked back neatly. His eyes were cold, calculating, and his confidence was nauseating. Mr. Carter, he said in a commanding tone, we need to talk. You won't dictate your rules in my house, I growled, glaring at him. Victor smirked, ignoring my anger. I advise you not to interfere. Furthermore, I insist you stay and listen. If you leave, my driver will stop you before you get far. And by nightfall, you'll be sitting in a jail cell. Now sit down. I glanced at the door and saw a massive man standing outside. A bodyguard. Victor wasn't bluffing. There wasn't any fear in me. I'd faced worse threats in my life, but I needed to hear what this snake had to say. Reluctantly, I sat back down, my body rigid with tension. Victor adjusted his tie and leaned forward slightly, as if he were giving a business presentation. Now that we're all settled, we can talk like adults. When your wife became my personal assistant, her duties expanded to include intimate matters. For the past 6 months, Sabrina and I have been very close. But we're tired of hiding. From now on, things will be open, transparent. My jaw clenched so tightly I thought my teeth might crack. You think you can just walk into my house, destroy my marriage, and tell me how things are going to be? Victor raised a hand to silence me. Mr. Carter, you will remain Sabrina's husband and father to your children. I have no intention of replacing you in that regard. But Sabrina will take care of my needs, both professional and personal. Most of the time, this will happen at the hotel or in my office, but sometimes, when you're not around, we'll use your bed, Victor said, his voice dripping with smugness. The sheer audacity of it made my blood boil. You scoundrel, I spat, rage coursing through me. Why the hell should I put up with this? I'd rather divorce this traitor and be done with it. My words came out sharp, directed at him, but piercing through to Sabrina, too. She didn't flinch. She just watched silently as Victor stepped forward, lowering his voice. The tone of his voice didn't just drip with menace. It was soaked in it. Mr. Carter, he began, that kind of talk won't get you anywhere. You need to remember who I am. I'm Victor Grant, a prominent lawyer from the most powerful law firm in this city. If you try to divorce Sabrina, you'll pay dearly, not just in court, but in every corner of your life. I felt my chest tighten as he leaned closer, his words stabbing deep. You'll lose everything. We'll make sure you're paying alimony and child support while she's living with me. You'll see your kids rarely, if ever. I'll ensure you're accused of crimes so vile no one will want to associate with you. Child abuse, neglect. Oh, the possibilities are endless. You'll lose your job, your reputation, your family, and your friends. By the time I'm done, Ethan, you'll be a ghost of the man you used to be. His threats hit harder than I expected, leaving me momentarily stunned. Sabrina just stood there, her arms crossed, silent, while Victor continued to outline my demise. And don't even think about going to my wife. If you try that, my driver and his associates will make sure you regret it. If you try to run, my investigators will find you. You're stuck, Carter. Accept it. Your wife is doing an exceptional job as my assistant. And I must say, Her oral work deserves particular praise. His smirk burned into me as my fists clenched under the table. I turned to Sabrina, my voice shaking with disbelief. Are you really going to do this to me? To us? Her eyes stayed calm, emotionless. I hope not, Ethan. If you cooperate, you'll get used to it over time. It'll seem normal. Normal? Was she even listening to herself? Normal? My chest tightened as I watched her and Victor head toward the door. They clearly thought this was over. But it wasn't. Not by a long shot. Wait, I said, my voice firm. I have a few words for you. Victor turned, irritated. What is it? Make it quick. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I'd been ambushed, blindsided, but I wasn't going to lie down and let them trample me. Well, I started, locking eyes with Victor. After I've had a couple of drinks and said goodbye to this sham of a marriage, I'll be making a call. I turned my gaze to Sabrina, watching her eyes narrow slightly. First, I'll call your wife, Victor. I'll tell her everything. Victor's smirk faltered, the first crack in his armor. What did you say? He asked, his tone unsure. I didn't repeat myself. Instead, I continued. After that, I'll call Sabrina's sister, Hannah. She deserves to know what kind of person her sister really is. Victor stiffened and used to facing resistance. Sabrina, for the first time, looked genuinely alarmed. You wouldn't, she stammered. Oh, I absolutely would, I said, my voice dripping with satisfaction. Early Saturday morning, I'll have a locksmith here to change all the locks. Afterward, I'll pay a visit to Kate. You know, the widow who lives down the street. She's been flirting with me ever since her husband passed. An hour ago, I wouldn't have even considered it, but things change, don't they? Sabrina's face twisted in a mix of shock and betrayal. Ethan, you can't do this. Oh, I can't, and I will. I stared directly at her now, enjoying the bitter satisfaction of her discomfort. When you come back on Sunday, Sabrina, you'll find all your belongings out on the front yard. Clothes, shoes, cosmetics, jewelry, hell, even our wedding album. And no, they won't be in trash bags. Better hurry and grab them before the sprinklers turn on at 4 a.m. Monday morning. Victor's smug confidence had turned into visible anger. His face flushed, his jaw tight, and his fists clenched. What else? I asked, feigning innocence. Oh, right, I added, leaning back slightly. On Monday, I'll be meeting with a divorce lawyer. I'll file for divorce on grounds of infidelity and name you, Victor, as an accomplice. I'll also sue your firm for violating corporate policies. Even if the lawsuits fail, they'll be enough to tarnish your reputation, Mr. Grant. Victor exploded, hurling his travel bag against the wall. He strode toward me, jabbing his finger hard into my chest. I could feel the rage vibrating off of him, but I didn't back down. Listen, fool, he growled. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I've been running this city for 30 years. I can destroy you in court, ruin you without lifting a finger. By the time Sabrina and I settle into the hotel tonight, you'll be in handcuffs, charged with crimes you can't even imagine. I know the police, the prosecutors, the judges. They owe me, and some of them fear me. He leaned in closer, his breath hot with fury. You think you're innocent? That it'll save you? It won't. I'll turn apart better men than you, Carter. Men who actually had power. You're nothing but a speck I can crush. I stared back at him, my anger no longer masked by composure. You can try, I said quietly. But you'll never win. Victor's face twitched, but he stepped back. You've been warned, he said coldly, turning toward the door. As Sabrina followed him, she glanced back at me, her expression a mix of anger, regret, and something that almost looked like fear. She opened her mouth to say something, but I cut her off. Don't, I said, my voice sharp. You've said enough. When the door closed behind them, I sat there in silence for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. The anger burned, but beneath it was something deeper, an overwhelming pain. They had stripped away everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my family, and myself. But I wasn't broken. Not yet. Not ever. They had no idea who I was or what I was capable of. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Victor paced the room like a predator circling its prey. You think you can beat me, Carter? You have no idea who you're dealing with. I've got dirt on everyone, Judges, cops, politicians. They owe me because I helped put them where they are. And if you so much as think about going to that girlfriend of yours tomorrow, the cops will stop you. They'll find a reason to search your car. And guess what? They'll discover pills, or worse. Then the Vice Squad will conveniently get a tip about inappropriate material on your computer. It'll ruin you, Carter. I stood there, gripping Betsy at my side, trying to keep my fury from boiling over. Victor's smugness was like fuel to a fire I could barely contain. He continued, his voice filled with venom. How long do you think you could fight all of this? You wouldn't even find a lawyer willing to go against me. Meanwhile, I'll still be with your wife. Got it, idiot? The weight of his threats pressed down on me, but I refused to buckle. Sir, he sneered mockingly, from now on, you'll address me as Mr. Grant or sir. If you disobey, Max will punish you. Isn't that right, Max? He gestured to his hulking bodyguard standing by the door. The taunts and threats piled up, and then Victor crossed the line. 2 quick blows to my face ignited something primal in me. I wasn't just angry, I was done. With lightning speed, I twisted his arm, wrenching it so hard he screamed and dropped onto the couch like a rag doll. Mux! Victor screeched. Get in here! I had been expecting Max. The guy was massive, a walking tank. His intimidating size might have shaken anyone else, but not me. Not after what I had endured. My mind flashed back to my time in the war, to those grueling 17 days of captivity. The torture, the humiliation, the unimaginable pain. They thought they'd break me. They didn't. Compared to that, Max was nothing. The first blow from Max sent me crashing into the coffee table, my nose breaking with a sickening crunch. The second strike landed on my eye, blurring my vision and nearly knocking me out. Pain coursed through my body, but I wasn't going to let this thug get the best of me. You hit like a girl, I taunted, spitting blood onto the carpet. Max's face twisted in anger. He grabbed me by the hair, preparing to deliver another blow, but the sharp crack of a gunshot rang out. Betsy barked, the bullet tearing through Max's shoulder. He staggered back, collapsing into a chair, clutching his arm in shock. How many lives have you taken, Max? I asked grimly, aiming Betsy at him. Because I've taken 27. Soldiers fighting for their beliefs. Many respected. You? You're nothing but a hired thug. You deserve no respect, no mercy. So tell me, Max, why shouldn't I finish the job? Max whimpered, begging for mercy. I lowered Betsy slightly, my voice cold and steady. That bullet passed clean through your shoulder joint. If you don't get to a doctor soon, you'll bleed out. But don't worry, prosthetics these days are fantastic. You'll learn to use your left hand. And if I ever see you again, Max, I'll assume you're here to finish me. And I won't hesitate to end you. Sabrina's voice cut through the tension. Oscar, watch out, she screamed. I turned just in time to see Victor swinging a fireplace poker at me. The blow landed on my forearm, pain exploding through me, but I didn't let it slow me down. I turned the tables, incapacitating him and forcing him onto the ground. I pressed Betsy's barrel against his temple, forcing him to freeze. How do you like my version of shock and awe, Victor? I hissed. If you had heard what I told Max, you'd know I've ended 27 lives. 7 of them with this very gun. And all it takes is 4 ounces of pressure to pull this trigger. I'm already halfway there. Victor's confidence evaporated. I ordered him to FaceTime his wife, and he reluctantly complied. As his wife's face appeared on the screen, I introduced myself. Mrs. Grant, my name is Ethan Carter. You don't know me, but you know my wife, Sabrina. She's been working as your husband's personal assistant for several months now, and in that time they've been having an affair. Today, they plan to spend the weekend together at a hotel. When I objected, your husband had his thug try to beat me to a pulp. Unfortunately, I had to shoot him. Mrs. Grant's face turned pale, her eyes wide with shock. It's time to go, Mrs. Grant, I said coldly, ending the call. The room was heavy with tension. Victor's threats and Sabrina's betrayal burned inside me, but I kept my voice calm. Now tell me, Victor, what was your brilliant plan? To send Max and your other thugs to silence me? How'd that work out for you? Victor didn't respond, his face contorted with fear. I leaned in closer. If you send anyone else after me, I'll come for you next. Do you understand me? He nodded shakily, his arrogance now replaced with terror. I turned to Sabrina, my voice hard. Get a damp towel and help Max. He's your mess to clean up now. She obeyed, her hands trembling. As I watched her patch up Max's wound, I felt no sympathy. This was the bed she had made, and now she could lie in it. I walked to the kitchen and hid my phone, still recording, in a stack of towels. If Victor used his connections to manipulate the cops, I needed every shred of evidence to protect myself. The sound of sirens filled the air as I stepped outside. My friend, retired Marine Colonel Orson Sage, stood on the porch, concern etched across his face. "Everything all right, Captain?" he asked. "Could be better, Colonel," I replied. Kate, my widowed neighbor, rushed over, worry evident in her eyes. "What happened to you, Ethan?" "I'll explain later," I said, grimacing. "My wife's boyfriend, a lawyer, tried to frame me for drugs and worse." The police arrived, along with an ambulance. I handed my weapon to Orson, not wanting the cops to find me armed. They took statements, and I briefly explained the situation. Max was carried out on a stretcher, Victor not far behind him. Sabrina, crying and apologizing, was escorted away by a female officer. I turned to her one last time. "Go to hell, Sabrina," I said coldly. As the medics prepared to transport me, I felt the weight of exhaustion settle in. My head throbbed, my body ached, but my spirit remained unbroken. They could take everything from me, but they couldn't take who I was. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I declared my innocence as firmly as I could, but the prosecutor fought hard to keep me confined. The judge, however, decided I needed a few more days in the hospital before the trial. It wasn't freedom, but it was better than a cold jail cell. During this nightmare, the visit from Uncle Jack was a beacon of hope. He reassured me that my children were safe, staying with Aunt Lucy, who had taken my side without hesitation. Finally, I had someone I could confide in, someone who believed me when the world seemed to have turned its back. Uncle Jack's presence gave me a chance to unburden myself. I told him everything, every humiliating detail, every moment of betrayal. The story sounded absurd, like something out of a bad movie, but the recording on my phone was proof. Jack listened carefully, promising to fight for me and to ensure the truth came out. "Your focus is recovery," he said. "I'll handle the rest." I nodded, trusting him with my life. My only request was that he look after my children. They were my only anchor in this storm. 3 days after being discharged, I stood before the judge with Jack by my side. Despite his best efforts, I was placed under house arrest at Jack's home in a secure community. I wasn't allowed to return to my house, not even to retrieve the phone with the evidence that could exonerate me. Anxiety gnawed at me, and when my neighbor, Colonel Orson Sage, reported seeing suspicious people near my garage, I knew I had to act. Uncle Jack devised a plan to retrieve my phone. He arranged a mediation meeting with Amanda and Stanley's lawyer, Gordon Merritt, under the guise of negotiating a plea deal. Jack, ever the strategist, steered the conversation smoothly. When Amanda softened after Jack mentioned my love for the children, he seized the moment. While asking for water and with Amanda's permission, Jack slipped into the kitchen and retrieved my phone. When he handed it over to experts for data extraction, hope flickered in me for the first time in weeks. The recording on the phone revealed everything. Victor's threats, Max's attack, Amanda's complicity. But there was more. An unopened email from an unknown address had compromising photos attached, likely planted as part of a frame-up. Jack laid out my options. We could present the evidence immediately to the district attorney and end this nightmare quickly, or we could wait for the trial to expose their entire conspiracy in court. The thought of swift justice tempted me, but my anger, my thirst for accountability, made the choice clear. "I want to destroy them," I said firmly. Jack grinned. "I knew you'd say that," he replied, a glint of excitement in his eye. "This will be like a Perry Mason moment. Let's give them a show." The week before the trial, Amanda paid me a visit. I wasn't sure what I felt seeing her again: anger, betrayal, sadness, or some twisted mix of all three. She looked immaculate, clearly trying to impress me, but I wasn't falling for it. "Come in, Amanda," I said stiffly. "You look wonderful." Thank you, Oscar, she replied, her tone soft. You look fit. I offered her wine, trying to maintain politeness, but she declined and got straight to the point. Despite everything, Oscar, I still love you. I couldn't hide my bitter laugh. I ruined your plans, didn't I? She hesitated before confessing. Stanley wanted to intimidate you, and I went along with it. He made me stage the bruises, the photos. It was all part of the plan to discredit you. From those photos, it's clear you had cuts and bruises, I said, my voice sharp. I never laid a hand on you. Did he? She nodded reluctantly. Stanley, he has a way of controlling people. And now you're here to convince me to plead guilty? I asked, my voice heavy with disdain. It's the best way out for everyone, she said, tears welling up in her eyes. I leaned back in my chair, staring at her. I'll think about it, I said, though we both knew I wouldn't. When she tried to hug me goodbye, I stepped away, too angry to offer comfort. At the trial, the prosecutor's opening words were a balm to my soul. First of all charges against Mr. Carter have been dropped. We believe he acted in self-defense. Relief washed over me as justice finally began to take shape. The prosecutor continued, issuing arrest warrants for Victor, Max, and Amanda on charges of conspiracy, perjury, and obstruction of justice. The realization that they would face consequences for their actions brought a grim satisfaction. Victor received 11 years, Max 7, and Amanda, due to her cooperation, only 3. The leniency of her sentence stung, but I was ready to focus on rebuilding my life. Before Amanda's imprisonment, I let her stay in the house with the children. This is your home, she said when I arrived with a light bag. I appreciated her effort to maintain normalcy for the kids. When we visited her in prison a month later, I saw a version of Amanda that I hadn't seen in years. Humbled, remorseful, trying to stay strong for the children. When Amanda was released, I helped her settle into a small townhouse. She invited me over for dinner, cooking my favorite meal, and the conversation turned heavy. Do you think we'll ever be together again? She asked, her voice tinged with hope. If you mean remarrying, no, I replied gently but firmly. Too much has happened, but I've moved past it. Amanda nodded, sadness in her eyes. This is probably more than I deserve, she said, but I'll accept it. Thank you for not turning away from the kids, or me. Amanda, I said quietly, you may not have noticed, but I've forgiven you. I hold no grudges and hope one day you'll forgive yourself. Maybe someday, she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. When I left her house that evening, I felt a strange sense of peace. It was as if the weight of the past had finally lifted. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I had survived. And now it was time to truly live.